I'm Gabriela Fresquez, and this is Radar 2021. If you're watching this, congratulations. You made it through 2020 and into what's starting to feel like the sequel. Yesterday marked a few important milestones, like 1 year since the first coronavirus patient was diagnosed in the U.S., 20 days since I stopped panic buying crystals on Etsy, and, oh yeah, we got a new president.
Preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Yesterday's inauguration was all about closing a chapter, because, as my therapist would say, closure is the marker of a new beginning, regardless if it's a mutual break. As in, regardless of whether one side relentlessly tries to ignore reality, reason, a sense of decorum, or the will of the American voters. But just when we thought we could return to our regularly scheduled programming of predictability, diplomacy, and, I don't know, maybe not inciting a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, we were hit with a blast from the all-too-recent past.
The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
The Senate impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump 2.0 will soon kick off. And in addition to stealing some of Amtrak Joe's spotlight, it could also delay the new administration's agenda. So why would Dems take the risk? Well, if Trump is actually convicted this time around, he could be barred from holding any federal office in the future. And given his legacy, they've decided it's a risk worth taking.
A one-term president left scorned, and in the immediate aftermath, a nation left so divided that Donald Trump's legacy may look completely different depending on where you stand politically. Like presidents before him, what he did while in power will be as memorable as what he said.
We're going to walk down and I'll be there with you, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength.
But unlike his predecessors, Trump's words will go down in history as having incited a deadly takeover of the U.S. Capitol.
The U.S. Capitol police officer who died after Wednesday's siege was from New Jersey.
He'll also be known as the first U.S. president to be impeached, not once, but twice.
The Constitution requires us to impeach and remove Donald John Trump.
The first time for soliciting the interference of a foreign government in the 2020 presidential election. And the second,
Let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue
for compelling his supporters to help him overturn the results of that election. Here are some stats. 232. That's the number of electoral votes Trump was able to secure. It's also the number of House representatives who voted to impeach him, the biggest margin of any U.S. presidential impeachment, of which there have only been 4, and of which Donald Trump has been the subject of 2. But in the year between both impeachments,
tonight the nation is suffering through a crisis of epic proportion.
A once-in-a-century pandemic made landfall, and Trump tackled it with denial.
It's going to disappear one day.
Then when the effects of COVID-19 became impossible to ignore, he switched gears.
It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
But many in his base did not follow suit. And in May 2020, as the pandemic spiraled, armed protesters in Michigan swarmed that state's capital, demanding that lockdown orders be lifted. Trump's response? He called them, quote, very good people. And we'd heard that before.
Very fine people on both sides.
His reaction wasn't the same, though. When protesters took to the streets after videos surfaced of yet another black man being brutally killed at the hands of police later that month, he called them thugs and domestic terrorists.
I am your president of law and order, an ally of all peaceful protesters.
But there was nothing peaceful about the insurrection of the U.S. Capitol that took place on the same day that Congress certified the 2020 presidential election results. Despite that,
Go home. We love you. You're very special.
and in the days that followed, there was silence until
We're joined together to celebrate a great achievement, the extraordinarily successful building of the wall.
his first public appearance since the siege. Where else but the U.S.-Mexico border? To celebrate the completion of more than 450 miles of border wall, reminding the nation of the top order in his agenda, to keep immigrants out. He leaves behind a nationalist legacy, as well as a fractured Republican Party.
To all the Republicans who have not been willing to actually fight, this isn't their Republican Party anymore. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party.
A GOP split between those who cautioned against an assault on our democracy.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
And those who supported Trump's attempts to overturn the election results at whatever cost.
Trump's fanatical efforts to invalidate the 2020 presidential election and prevent Joe Biden's swearing in failed miserably.
The Trump campaign is losing a lawsuit to seek to halt vote counting in Michigan.
The federal judge this weekend dashed the hopes of President Trump's campaign in Pennsylvania.
Judges keep throwing them out for lack of evidence.
Breaking news tonight from the U.S. Supreme Court rejecting that lawsuit backed by President Trump.
I feel like if Trump had owned a dog, things could have turned out differently. Think about it. Dogs provide unconditional admiration, uncompromising loyalty, and are, for the most part, submissive to the whims of their masters. Trump could have gotten all of that and more from a Bichon Frise. Plus, it's way cuter than Stephen Miller, and still white. Because we all saw what happened when a member of the Trump team dared to dissent. Let's take a moment to reflect on the 4-year series we like to call The Apprentice, White House Edition.
You're fired. You were not able to effectively lead the Bureau. You're also fired.
The president has asked Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to step aside.
You're fired.
Jeff Sessions stepping down.
You're fired.
Announcing via tweet, Defense Secretary Mark Esper has been terminated.
You're all fired.
But a lot of Trump administration officials didn't wait to be fired. They quit. Some early on, and a slew of them just 2 weeks ago following the hostile takeover of the U.S. Capitol that was carried out by a Trump-fueled mob who bought into the president's lies of a rigged and stolen election. And for some of his most fierce loyalists, i.e. those willing to lie to federal authorities to protect him, Trump tapped into an Oprah-like giveaway spirit by handing out pardons and commutations before begrudgingly signing off. A lot of people have asked me, Gabby, with Trump out of office, what will the media talk about? The answer is literally anything, but more specifically, stuff that matters. Remember what that used to be like? Me neither.
This is the race against time.
A growing crisis overseas. 2 inmates involved in a brazen prison break. The U.S. women win the World Cup.
They're calling this Deflategate.
But I suppose it was a challenge for the media to stay focused when the president managed to unleash over 25,000 tweets while in office. You know, before he was banned. Set forth the largest deficit in U.S. history, left the nation's federal debt at $21 trillion, and introduced 0 plans to overhaul the nation's healthcare system. And there was like this wall Mexico forgot to pay for. Either way, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have officially received the White House Wi-Fi passwords following a ceremony that, in light of COVID-19 guidelines, looked and felt different from inaugurations of the past.
Una nación bajo Dios indivisible con libertad y justicia para todos. Let's get loud.
Equipped with music.
Amazing grace.
A parade. Face masks. And virtually every time-honored tradition, the Biden-Harris inaugural celebration was delivered just like that, virtually. A break from the mass rallies Americans have grown accustomed to from the former commander-in-chief. The incoming administration, instead, urged Americans not to travel to D.C., all to prevent further spread of COVID-19. Still, the event was nothing short of historic. At 78, Biden became the oldest president in U.S. history and only the second Catholic elected to that position.
And I ask every American to join me in this cause, uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, solemnly swear.
While Harris became the first female vice president and the first Black and South Asian official to hold the title,
That I will well
and she was sworn in by the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor. And though it all happened without the attendance of a massive crowd, there was a field of 200,000 flags that could be seen from space. The exiting president was a no-show, opting to break the tradition of participating in the democratic process that is the transition of power. But 45 did leave something behind to remember him by. Over 20,000 troops reinforcing the Capitol, unlike any inauguration before, 2 weeks after an insurrection by his supporters threatened the Capitol building. The theme was unity.
Being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it.
Aside from our first ever virtual presidential inauguration, something else that might look different is Biden's White House staff. Amid calls from national civil rights organizations to build an administration that looks like America, so far, Biden is doing just that. He's nominated retired Army General Lloyd Austin for Defense Secretary, as well as Michael Reagan to lead the EPA, potentially making them the first black men in those roles. He also nominated Avril Haines, the first woman to lead the U.S. intelligence community, tapped Pete Buttigieg for Secretary of Transportation, possibly making him the first openly gay member of a presidential cabinet, and the nominations of Alejandro Mayorkas to head the Department of Homeland Security and Javier Becerra for U.S. Health Secretary would make both of them the first Latinos in those roles. And to serve as Assistant Secretary of Health, Biden has chosen Dr. Rachel Levine, making her the first openly transgender federal official to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
I think there are really important things in terms of assembling a group of people, and the two most important for me are inclusion and representation. So now you have people in the Latinx community, you have LGBTQ members, you have women, you have people of color included in the cabinet.
This is going to be the most diverse cabinet that America has ever seen.
Specifically where I feel like a lot of Latinos don't feel safe in this country in terms of like immigration. It's nice to know that somehow the Secretary of Homeland Security is a Latino and could hopefully like be there for them, you know what I mean? I'm
excited for new Latinos to be part of the cabinet, for black men to be part of the cabinet, and for an openly gay man to be part of the cabinet.
Now, if there's something that the White House has not seen, is a gay person. The LGBTQ community has never seen that.
I'm so happy that he's working together with the Biden administration.
It's about time.
Biden has also nominated several female senior staff members and an all-female senior communications team, including Julissa Reynoso Pantaleon as Chief of Staff to First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. And for Director of White House Intergovernmental Affairs, he selected Julie Chavez Rodriguez, the granddaughter of civil rights leader Cesar Chavez.
Para implementar una agenda para nuestra comunidad, como asuntos como inmigración y reforma migratoria, de mejorar el cuidado de salud y también educación para nuestra comunidad.
And while an administration that reflects the ethnic diversity of the country is important, diverse life experiences, socioeconomic backgrounds, and just generally being a good person who prioritizes human beings over profit is also appreciated. Progressives, for example, have already raised a flag about a conflict of interest concerning Biden's Defense Secretary nominee, Lloyd Austin, for his corporate ties to a leading weapons manufacturer. Is it really that hard to include a caveat in the Defense Secretary nomination process that disqualifies candidates who may directly profit from war? Overall, Biden's public political agenda seems to have elements that could satisfy multiple sides of a splintered Democratic Party. And with Democrats already having a majority in the House and now taking a narrow majority in the Senate following 2 Georgia runoff elections, Biden's legislative wish list seems more feasible than ever.
The chair lays before the Senate 2 certificates of election for the state of Georgia and a certificate of appointment to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of former Senator Kamala D. Harris of California.
The Senate is now split 50-50, with VP Harris playing the role of tiebreaker, which means Dems decide which items get top priority. It also means Republican Senator Mitch McConnell is replaced by Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader, giving him the power to decide which bills make it onto the floor. Let's all take a minute to let that sink in. In his first 100 days in office, Biden has pledged to prioritize the pandemic, the climate crisis, racial equity, and immigration reform. And he's already gotten started with the multitude of executive orders he signed in his first couple of days in office. On immigration, he's promised to eliminate restrictions on asylum seekers, ensure a 100-day moratorium on deportations, and ensure protection for dreamers, which is, ironically, Stephen Miller's nightmare. But the former VP of an administration that deported more than 3 million immigrants will need to do a lot more than that to carve out a road to redemption.
I think what President-elect Biden, has to remember is that he has an ally on the immigrant community. For me, the priority is clear. Number one, Joe Biden has to essentially follow through with the big ticket items in terms of figuring out a pathway forward on DACA and TPS, programs that actively right now, protect, almost 2 million people and essentially figure out a way to expand that with the added, asterisk that not only expand that, but he also mentioned designated new countries like Venezuela, as beneficiaries. I think ultimately this is not just an opportunity to undo the damage that Donald Trump caused, but rather to transform, humanize, and modernize the way that we talk about immigration.
Another reversal President Biden plans on is strengthening the Affordable Care Act through more federal investment. And in addition to pursuing a $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan, he also wants to invest trillions into a unified coronavirus strategy, as well as back legislation that would create a COVID-19 racial and ethnic disparities task force, a proposal made by VP Kamala Harris while she served in the Senate. And in response to the national outcry over police killings of Black Americans, Biden and Harris are both calling for reform and seem committed to shedding their controversial pasts. His for co-authoring a 90s crime bill that led to mass incarceration of Black and brown Americans, and hers a reputation as California's top cop, who critics say failed to intervene in cases involving police killings.
President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time were right that the bill was significant.
The most significant federal effort to deal with violent crime in America.
There was the good and there was the bad. For example, the bill eliminated 19 types of semi-automatic assault weapons. But the most pernicious provision of the 1994 crime bill was its $12 billion authorized for states across the country that would enact what's called truth in sentencing laws. The federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons.
Harris claims that in the 2000s, she didn't flex laws like 3 strikes. She said as DA, her policy was only to pursue a 3rd strike if the crime was serious or violent. And yet she remained proud that the felony conviction rate rose during her tenure.
When we're talking about serious and violent crime, lock them up. In San Francisco, in my office, we've increased the conviction rates for the DA's office to the highest they've been in just under 15 years.
Both Biden and Harris want to institute a National Police Oversight Commission, invest $300 million into community policing measures, and task the Justice Department with investigating police misconduct. And sure, we've been here before, wading through the promises of a new administration. Many Americans are skeptical or flat out distrust the government's ability to solve the country's most pressing issues. And given the dystopian freak show that American politics has become, I don't blame you. But one particular sector is optimistically rallying around a certain minor issue: student loan debt, or as I like to call it, indentured servitude of the 21st century.
From the start of the Great Recession in 2008 to the relative economic stability of 2018, college costs increased by 25%, while student debt increased by 107%. State and federal funding for higher education, the biggest source of revenue for most schools, has not returned to pre-2008 levels. The decisions of the past are having a significant impact on borrowers today.
$1.6 trillion. That's, a significant fraction of our $20 trillion GDP. That's how much we produce for the country per year.
325 organizations and nonprofits are pressuring Biden to enact student loan debt forgiveness. And they're not alone. Senator Chuck Schumer is calling on Biden to forgive up to $50,000 in student debt per borrower on the first day of his presidency. That's the type of pardon a lot of Americans can rally behind.
The largest category of household debt, other than mortgages, is student loans, and most of that debt is owed directly to the federal government. if people who, instead of spending that money in the economy, are spending that money by sending money back to the federal government on their student loan payments. That is a problem for the economy, is it not?
Research has repeatedly shown that student loans make it harder for Americans to buy houses, start businesses and families, save, invest, or feel like they'll ever rid themselves of the crippling sensation of falling deep into an ever-increasing pit of darkness and desperation that plagues them daily, also known as debilitating debt.
Let's get into this debilitating and actually pretty embarrassing student loan debt, but I want to share it with you just because, you know, we are all there. And hopefully one day I will cry of happiness because I am no longer Sally Mae's Alright, so I have student loans with 2 different companies. For AES Success, my student loans total $34,134.20. For Nelnet, this is the kicker, $152,677.65. I don't even want to look at it anymore because I want to kill myself. I feel like I want to cry and that I'm something I'm never, ever, ever going to be able to pay off.
So, if the new POTUS and VEEP are looking to fast-track real economic recovery, student loan debt forgiveness could be a starting point. Just saying. For a friend. A very close friend. So yeah, there will be plenty of stuff for the media to talk about with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in office. The news might not be as sensational or unprecedented or focus on as many salacious memoirs written by disgruntled ex-White House officials. With any luck, it might even be boring, or tolerable, or just unremarkable. Personally, I'm looking forward to far fewer anxiety-inducing headlines, making science a thing again, a president who doesn't hesitate to denounce white supremacy, and having a dog in the White House again. Because all Americans can agree that dogs are awesome, I think. I'm Gabriela Fresquez for Radar 2021. We made it through 2020, everybody. See you next week.